Today, we're talking to our longtime friend, Dr. Michael Okun, who we've known over 15 years.
Dr. Okun is the head of neurology at the University of Florida. He's also the medical director for the Parkinson Foundation, and his full bio is in the description below.
This is not your typical talk with a neurologist. It's goes all over the board, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. It touches on topics that you don't really normally hear a doctor talk about.
And it's about 50 minutes long, but I think if you stick with us, you're really going to enjoy it.
Stay with us. Thanks so much. Michael Okun, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we've before the interview, we actually talked to Michael about how long we've known him. We think it's over 15 years, so it's been quite a long time.
Yeah,
at various events. Not a lot of time.
You all have been, really an amazing force for good and just getting out there and putting yourselves out there, as not only persons with Parkinson, in your case, Karl, but the Parkinson is a disease that affects families and many other people. And so, Angela, you've been there. So we've had a lot of journeys together. We've met in a lot of cities. We've been to the White House together.
Exactly.
So we're old friends. We're definitely old friends. Yeah.
It's like paths crossing. Every once in a while, we bump into each other and then we go.
Yeah.
We'll see you in Barcelona, I hope.
I hope so.
I hope so too. It'd be great to see everybody in person. One of the things that we've been most concerned about is, for folks with Parkinson's, as well as with other neurological diseases, the effects of isolation and, how important it is. Remember, Parkinson is a cueing disease of the brain. And so, getting out there and cueing that brain up and doing regular exercise and having access to these things, super important. So it'd be great to see you, but also to see everybody else out there and back to life when it's safe.
I agree.
Amen. Oh my gosh.
Well, and I you just gave me a great thing to ask, which was not on the question list, which is about cueing. I think that's so under talked about, especially from a care partner's perspective. When we do, I use it a lot. For a long time, I didn't even know what the word meant, but it's certainly something that I think is Karl's journey down the road with Parkinson's is more and more part of our daily life.
When does cueing and nagging?
That's a research study, I'm sure.
Yeah. So cueing and nagging, where does that where does that scale go? It's kind of a Likert scale. It's not really an exact number. Like, when do you cross over and it becomes nagging? Well, I will tell you something very interesting, and that's, early in my career, I had the absolute distinct honor of being trained by a man named Malin DeLong, and he's at Emory University, was at Johns Hopkins and the National Institutes of Health before that. Was a recipient of the Lasker Award, who, that over 30% of the people that win the Lasker go on to win a Nobel Prize. And he studied, these circuits called the basal ganglia in the brain. And, he tells the story of how the folks in the lab got assigned the different parts of the brain. Like, one famous guy got the cerebellum and somebody else got the frontal cortex. And then, nobody wanted the basal ganglia because it's so hard and tricky, and nobody had mapped it. And he began studying the single cells and mapping it, and went after one of the hardest regions of the brain to understand. And I think, his work and, the work of so many other people that are in this field have really given us an appreciation that these structures in the brain, they are about cueing and about timing and how mysterious they are. And if we cue, and we could say, oh, you get stuck and you freeze, and we give these cues, do this, do that, listen to a sound, use a metronome, listen to the Bee Gees, all of those things, they're very useful, but also remember the regularity, the consistency of cueing. And we know now, and though I think be some more data coming out about this in exercise, that as we exercise, for those that do it regularly with the regular cueing, the brain responds and you keep better function going forward. And so, this idea of cueing is super important. And the other thing you brought up that I love is this idea of nagging. And the first scientist actually that I'm aware of that wrote about nagging is a fellow by the name of Joe Friedman, who is a really great neurologist. He's at Brown University. And Joe is somebody that cares deeply for his persons with Parkinson, but also for family members, spends a lot of time in Africa, gives money to medications for people in Africa. And he wrote a chapter in one of his books about no more nagging, because a lot of times we end up nagging the folks with Parkinson for things that they can't help. And it doesn't always, help the relationship. And so, what you bring up is so important, because you certainly want to cue and encourage people to do things. But at the same time, if you cross over that line and you get to nagging, and I love that idea of the cue versus the nag. And Angela, maybe we'll get you to write a blog for our Parkinson's Secrets blog on when does cueing and nagging go, because I love that concept. So thank you for asking about that.
But that line is so thin, and it has so many variables to it. I that might be a really long blog post, because I think there's so many, the mental health of like you said, the relationship, the mental health of a relationship, the type of relationship that the couple has, or even the child parent relation. That's a whole nother thing. But it's really, really, some days it works effortlessly.
When's that?
I'm gonna have to video you, because it does work. Well, and also I found mimicking is another thing. Like, it's a non-nag cue. That if I do something, then Karl unconsciously does something similar or follows me along. And I guess that's like the observational nature of my form of caregiving. I pay attention to stuff like that. So
yeah, well, I'll tell you, my wife and I are very active in the community, and one of our causes is in helping with autism. And when you learn about helping children with autism, it brings up this idea of improv. And there's some great researchers. One is named Matt Lerner, who's on Long Island in New York. And he does some really terrific work. And there are others in Newton, Massachusetts. And, they get the kids together and they teach them the yes and, to keep going. And this improv is very good. And this was funded by a guy by the name of Alan Alda, who is, a well-known actor who now has Parkinson's disease. And so there's been interest in this in Parkinson's disease as well, the improv and communication. And Alan Alda has been a great champion for communication and for the yes and for improv techniques, and did a series on PBS about communicating and how we need to teach our scientists and doctors to be better communicators and to speak, to the masses so that people can understand what we're trying to say. But the idea of what you're bringing up, Angela, this idea of improvisation, can also be a potential tool in the armamentarium or the toolbox of people that are dealing with Parkinson.
Well, that leads me into humor. Just humor, having a sense of humor in your relationship, and having Parkinson's. I think I really think it's important to have a good sense of humor. It seems to lighten the. I find more much easier to deal things with a sense of humor than anything else. It seems like a positive element. We laugh a lot. A
lot of times laughing at myself.
yeah. And it's a therapy.
People don't think Parkinson's. There's some funny elements in Parkinson's sometimes. if you look at it with a different perspective, it's not always funny, but there are some funny times with Parkinson's.
Yeah. So there are series of people, Carl, who have championed this. There's even, people that champion this in Parkinson on Twitter and other accounts that you see about how important this is. And Patch Adams was somebody that championed being, positive in hospital settings. John Graham Cole, the poet, John Fox, was big on this notion. And there's several famous psychologists, social psychologists. I think Alan Coles in Parkinson talked about this, but laughing your way to good health, not just in Parkinson, but in other diseases. And I think that what you're getting at, Carl, is so important. And, I'm struck, as I've traveled the world, at least in the pre-COVID era, and had a chance to really see, the different hemispheres and see the different healthcare systems. I'm struck by the differences between Eastern and Western medicine. And, in Western medicine, where we sit, and we're biased, obviously, because we sit in the Western hemisphere, we focus so much, Carl, on, the specifics of being drug dealers and drug pushers, when we're doctors, to kind of cut through to the bottom line. And if you go to Eastern medicine, the focus is really on the person and a realization, a philosophy of life that you can have the philosophy that you have all these problems, right? You have problems and you have issues to deal with, or you can have the philosophy that, hey, it doesn't matter. Like if I solve one set of issues, another set's going to emerge. This is what we call life. And life needs to be enjoyed. It needs to be embraced. And as we see each problem, that can transform into an opportunity. And it depends on how we think and how we look at these things. And I believe, this is just my own core belief, that the Eastern medicine philosophy of healing, okay, which is different than the Western medicine philosophy of traditional medicine, has its place, and that the meld of the two is important. And I think that it's a mistake for us to, abandon Eastern principles and say, oh, we're really smart and everything needs to be evidence-based, and, and there's nothing to this healing, and realize that actually contextually, this is super important. We know that, connections in the brain, we know that these little things called synapses change on social context, how we communicate with each other, whether we laugh, whether we cry. We also know with different diseases, cancer, Alzheimer's, Parkinson, that when somebody, gives up, they often will pass away quickly. And when somebody, has the will to fight and go on, they don't. And so there is a social context that connects our brain to the rest of the organs in our body. And we haven't embraced that. We don't completely understand it. And maybe that's the reason why we haven't embraced it. But I think, it gets at that core principle of, laughing yourself to better health, learning how to mix, together. And even as we construct multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary cares for folks with Parkinson, thinking about how you bring in that Eastern element. And so we recently, in our new institute, had opportunities to bring in Eastern medicine philosophies, to mix with Western, and I think it's really great.
And that's so refreshing. Thank you. Over 20 years ago, Angela and I became Reiki masters. I was a huge skeptic. Angela was a skeptic at the point.
I made him go first for the first session. I was like, you can go. You be the guinea pig. I'll sit on the sidelines.
And it changed our lives.
Our trajectory of our lives.
I've seen it. I'll speak for myself. It calms me down. It brings my energy back. I sleep better because of it.
But I think you nailed the idea on the head. The first level of Reiki is self-care. Yeah. So you have to break through you have to dig down to it's about the individual, and so much that we do is not, so much we learn in school and caring for ourselves. We didn't come with manuals. So we have to say, you have to focus on yourself first. You have to go inward first versus being out all the time. Then once you do treat yourself, then you can go and do all the things that you said, the social environment, the people, the interaction, the learning, etc. It builds from there. But if you don't have a strong core, that's those other things are not gonna impact you as positively, I think. And I think you're absolutely right with that.
I'm afraid science doesn't embrace it, mainly because it's so hard to calibrate.
Measure, the measuring part. Anecdotal, where does that fit the scientific method?
But it's not surgery. It's not expensive. It's there's so many things you can do for yourself, like with Eastern medicine, that it doesn't involve a scalpel, and it doesn't involve a pill. That's something that everyone needs to at least look at, whether you have Parkinson's or not. It's
everybody's got something.
Yeah. And I think from what I know of what people talk about with this, at least for the last 2 decades, they talk about alternative medicines. And to me, what does that mean? It means that we just haven't collected the data to know whether or not these things work, or even more specifically, how they work, right? And, because if you choose the wrong outcome variable for a study, your study is going to be negative, right? But that it may be that, many of these things have their benefits. And so I think that, when we, as healthcare providers, no matter what member of the interdisciplinary team we are, that if we place the person with the disease as the sun in the center, and we rightly orbit around them, then we have to figure out sort of what can we do to help them to self-actualize. And so this gets back to Abraham Maslow and Maslow's theories of finding self-actualization, finding transcendence to the next level. And I'm fascinated that you bring up Reiki, because Reiki has a lot to do with energy, and what kind of energy you have. And I've never done Reiki myself, in full disclosure, but I think that the core principle of understanding your energy, and or at least the process to seek, some, understanding, because you're also seeking some understanding. We know that there's relaxation and stress reduction and anxiety reduction, and certainly all of these things can be useful and are all, potential symptoms of Parkinson, but there may be other benefits too that we don't understand. And so I think that we don't talk enough about the idea of self-actualization and what the psychologist Barry Scott Kaufman calls transcendence, transcending to a higher level of self-actualization among you and the community. And so I believe that as we test more of these things, we have to go, with an open mind. And we can still be scientists, but I think we have to have an open mind, and we have to think about what could be self-actualizing for everyone. And it might be very different, when we think it through. And so, I'm glad that you brought that up. I think it's an absolutely fascinating topic.
Thank you. That brings to light, a couple questions. That brings
a couple. I got a lot.
Is Parkinson's disease a misnomer of a name for this illness?
It's interesting. It's hard to know. A number of years ago, we had done a paper in History of Medicine with a history of neuroscience scholar who's also a neurologist named Peter Kohler, who's in the Netherlands. And we've been friends for years. We're both history geeks and nerds, but he actually has a PhD in history of science. And so we began to actually look at this question of who gets the credit and who gets eponyms. And probably not going to surprise you, Karl, or you, Angela, that many times the people that get the credit for the diseases and what we call the diseases don't actually deserve the credit. And many times it becomes a mischaracterization. In the story of Parkinson's disease, the disease itself has existed for centuries and centuries. One of the great stories that I like is that of in Shakespeare and in Dick. He talks about the famous line, "Why dost thou quiver, man?" And this idea of paralysis agitans, obviously not paralysis, but that's what they used to call it. And people with palsy and shakes, and you see it, pop up in all sorts of things. Everything from the Revolutionary War, if you're Americans, to the Crusades. So, you just name it, people with tremors and things. So it's been around a long time. And in fact, the picture that floats around after the 1817 Parkinson description, the famous essay by the general practitioner in London, James Parkinson, that picture that floats around is not actually James Parkinson, the doctor, it's James Parkinson, the dentist. So it's a mischaracterization of the historical record of who described it. And it was sort of the father of modern neurology, Charcot, that in some, king-like way was a kingmaker for Parkinson and decided that it would be James Parkinson, and that would be kind of the name that stuck, or at least that's the folklore of how it happened. It's often hard to put it on there. And people have asked me, and I got asked just this week a fantastic question, which is, people refer to it as Parkinson, but is there another term? Is there another way that, that like if you said something that people would say, oh, you mean Parkinson? And I've been thinking about it all week long, because at first you could be very dismissive of that, and I don't know the answer to that. And part of it is because as we've learned more science, we realize that not all tremors are Parkinson. We know 1 in 5 people don't have Parkinson. So now I have too much information, right? So I can't even answer our question. I can't answer a simple question because I'm overloaded with all of this information, and so I don't know the answer. But I will tell you this: when we were at the White House together, and we all made comments that went up on the website for the White House. One of the comments I made was referring to Parkinson as the most complex disease in clinical medicine when you consider all the motor and non-motor features, the response to levodopa surgeries, alternative therapies, exercise therapies, everything. It becomes, in my mind, complex and gets more complex every year that you have it. So it's dynamic. So anytime somebody gives you an answer that long, Karl, that means they don't know the answer. So I'm gonna hang my hat and say I don't really know.
I like 400 questions after that one. But
that leads to the question: Parkinson's isn't just one disease, is it?
So that's right. Bosch and Bloom in the Netherlands, we were writing for a major journal, made the attempt with the journal editors to title the piece. Was a review article, Parkinson's Diseases, and makes the very articulate and really thought-provoking argument that it's different for every sufferer. Now, I think that's probably too wide for me. Like the lens is too wide, but leave it to Boss to challenge conventional thought.
He does.
Yeah, so I think if you think about it in that way, certainly we now recognize that it's not one disease. There are multiple genes, right? And 10, 15, 20%, depending on which geneticist you read or believe in, or how many genes you believe actually cause Parkinson, and then you're left with 80% where we're not sure, at least from the, there's no single piece of DNA that we've been able to line up. And so we see different presentations and fundamentally as scientists and clinicians, we need to have enough people to study. So at some point you begin clumping them together and to get enough people to do a study. And if they respond to dopamine, right? And they have a reasonable number of symptoms. We clump them together and say, okay, well, there's some sort of dopamine responsive neurological disease. Let's clump them all together and study them. And the reality is that when we're all gone and people look back, they will measure what happened in thousands of years, not in hundreds or 50 or in 20-year or 30-year epic careers of scientists. And they'll look back and be able to put some precision and correct us as to the things that we were wrong about.
Well, as you talk, it makes me think that Parkinson's is a holistic disease. I hate to use or to summarize it to that extent, but it affects so many symptoms of the body. Like you said, 20 years ago, we didn't have, having been in the community for 25 years, seeing the progression of what we know, it really does seem like it's this holistic condition that is
permeates
pigeonholed in the neurology, but neurology it's a network problem. I guess is the simplest thing when you think about computers. It's like a signal network problem, but it affects everything that's inside the network. So that means the whole person. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's right. And I think that your choice of words, you're going after a word like network is really a brilliant way to think about it. And I think you can think about it as a network in multiple levels, all the way down to the science, but also coming full circle, back to the folks that are affected by Parkinson. And so, it really does. So we think about words, like if you were going to say, what's the one word to describe it? Is it, we talked about cueing, we talked about networks. How do you bring it full circle? And it's important to step back. And so one of the things I like about what you said, Angela, is you're really thinking about this from a 50,000 foot point of view rather than a very myopic view. You're taking a very inclusive view as to what may or may not be going on. And also, we have to take that, by the way, in my view, after being at this for a few decades, we need to be taking that view when we think about new therapies and new treatments as well. We need to take a step back and think about that.
Well, that brings up a good.
I'm just wondering if it used to be Parkinson's was a dopamine deficiency. It's really isn't it more than that? Do we think maybe it's more than just the dopamine deficiency?
Yeah, so there's no question, for anybody listening to your podcast, there's just no question that Parkinson's disease is not just a disease of dopamine, and it's time to really break out of that. And we are still struggling, right? And I think until we can extricate that from our general vocabularies and realize that it's a degeneration of multiple systems and multiple organ systems, we won't move as far as we can.
So Michael, that brings up a good question. Is we're sort of winding down. I think we've passed the halfway point, but since we've already, all of it, especially Karl and you, have spent more than 3 decades in this field, what do we do for the next 3 decades as we mature through the disease, both from our side and from your side, and by putting the patient in the center? How do we move to the next level and provide that next level of approach?
Yeah, so I think that it's important for us to be more practical as we move forward. It's important for us to acknowledge where we've been successful and where we've had our failures. It's important, not to continue to repeat failures and to be open-minded to new approaches. And we need to learn from other diseases and other disease states, how they did it, and try not to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, in a way that where we'll continue to sputter or go off the road. And so as we, come together as a community, I think one of the most profound learning experiences for me was writing the book with Ray and Boss and Todd Scherer, the Ending Parkinson's Disease book. And we, there you go. You even got some bookmarks in it.
Lots of good stuff in here. Yes.
Good to know, Carl and Angela, that at least 2 people I know of. But you talk about self-actualization. I think the group of the 4 of us had sort of a bit of an aha moment in actualizing this idea that to move forward with polio, with HIV and other diseases, we have to be thinking in terms of how others have done it and how others have broken through. And so the pact was big: prevent, advocate, care, and treat, and developing new treatments. I think that is a transformative way to think about it. I also believe that we have to take our lessons from HIV and cancer and thinking about, as we're trying to break through, just accept the fact that we haven't gotten there. We shouldn't pretend, like we're always, like almost there, or stem cells is going to be the next cure, or vaccine is going to, we have to stop pretending, and we've got to come to terms with where we are. And also remember how many examples in history there are where we have to challenge the conventional thoughts, and we have to start to think about combinations. And so in my mind, one of the things I've been starting to write about more is the idea of returning to the notion that we have to line up our therapies and look at synergies to try to move the needle between therapies. And I think we are still a little too divided, if I was going to be critical of our field, not because people are fundamentally against each other, but because they're for what they're for. And maybe that's human nature, right? And maybe that's the part of human nature that we need to put to the side. But it may be at the end of the day, Karl, that for you and for others who have Parkinson's, certainly you're a champion, having had it for 30 plus years, I just can't help but think that there are going to be advances if we bring therapies together and we transcend, talk about self-actualization and transcendence. We transcend the splits between insurance companies, governments, foundations, patient advocacy groups, that everybody tries to advance their own therapy for the financial gain. I can't help but think that if we started to combine these things, which there are a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the free market that stops this from happening, that we may be able to find combination therapies like the heart combination therapies in cancer chemotherapy that really took leukemias and lymphomas from 30% survival to 90% survival. So I think that there's a path forward, but I think that we should not fear the unknown. I think we should embrace it, and we should not fear the failure. I think we should learn from it, and we shouldn't fear each other. And I think there's a lot of fear, and there is a path. And the question isn't, whether humankind will go down this path. We will. It'll be just like the Chinese philosopher Lu Xun said, we'll get on the road that's not there, and together we'll walk and we'll make that road. The question is do we want to walk it now, or do we want to wait and walk it really slowly for several generations down the road? And with the growth of these diseases, and one of the things that Ray Dorsey has been just so good at documenting the science of the explosive growth and helping us to understand what this means for Medicare and collapsing healthcare systems. I think we should, get on the road together more and walk a little faster, or should I say maybe a lot faster? And because I think we're going to get there. And the question is when do you want to get there? When do you want to arrive? Is there urgency here or not?
That brings back the Pan days of the thought of a moonshot for Parkinson's. We need a moonshot for Parkinson's.
Well, and Carl mentioned it the other day, like when we have these online events, webinars to educate, to kind of bring people forward by providing them education and information, but yet the sign up percentage is kind of slow, and we have this disparity between the generations. The older generation who's like, well, I've kind of lived my life, so now I got this diagnosis.
Yeah.
And then there's the middle generation like us, we're still living, providing, and moving things. And then we have the younger folks behind us who are kind of just starting out. It's like, we need to, how do we communicate the urgency to all the generations to get everybody, to start running together? And how do we inspire them to do that? I mean, that's what you're doing with your videos. That's what we're doing with our videos and blogs and books, etc.
Yeah, well, if I was to borrow from, one of my favorite authors, but one of, I think, everyone's favorite authors is Malcolm Gladwell. Well, he talks about the importance of disagreeableness, the idea of being disagreeable, not to block progress, but to make progress by bringing out new ideas, because the newest ideas are always going to be met with some amount of skepticism or some amount of not willing to go along with it. And so I think, he talks about disagreeableness, and he also talks about urgency. And so those would be two elements that I think the Parkinson community could, easily, not easily, but could give some thought to how those things could be brought into the fold. And, I think we really risk all becoming and transforming into talking heads. And, myself included, and every day I practice medicine, I often say I know a little less every day. And it's very humbling. And the pace of change is fast, and what you thought you knew 5 years ago, even how you practiced and what you know now, is different. And so when we look each other in the eyes, I think we have to do it with that, amount of humbleness. And so when you see groups of us, myself included, out on the stage speaking so confidently about our scientific discoveries and what's going on in our respective labs and how sure we are of everything, I look back now, and maybe that's wisdom, as I live more years, but I can't help but wonder, if even myself in my own career, you're a little overconfident in the science, and that part of the process is to continue to question things and come at things from different angles. And so, Angela, I think it's going to be really important that that we don't have the same people up there always spewing the same things, that we're thinking about these problems in new ways, but also with the appropriate amount of urgency. And so getting back to what you said, Karl, the urgency, and as you've been in this for 30 years, I've been in it for 20 plus years. So you're my senior here, Karl, so be kind to me. But as your student of advocacy, I would say that, I'm not satisfied that we're urgent enough. I have a talk that I give where I don't say the grade that I give us on our advocacy, but I write it on the slide, and it's not good. And I say it as a critic to myself, having been the medical director and medical advisor for Parkinson Foundation for so many years, and working in advocacy and talking to, focus groups and persons with disease and caregivers and care partners, and frankly, anybody who will listen, that we're not doing as good of a job as we could.
Yeah.
It's
reassuring to hear that, but then also it's heartbreaking.
Do you see a day where there's more sharing of information between organizations and physicians, actually a willingness to share and not this is my bailiwick, and
collaboration.
Yeah, a collaboration of utilities.
Yeah. Do I think that we don't share enough as scientists? Yes, I think that. And I mean, I think that's a fair criticism. Do I think we're doing better and better at this each year? Yes, I do. Do I think this is the critical element that's missing to catalyze the reaction to make Parkinson go faster? I actually don't think so. So now let me take a little inflection here in our discussion and say, certainly you could focus on that, but the real problem in my mind, and we wrote about this in the Daily Beast in an op-ed, is the need for Operation Warp Speed. You mentioned we need a moonshot, same deal, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the moonshots are that you recognize if they fail and you embrace failure as much as you embrace success, right? That's part of the definition of a moonshot. So, but the fundamental problem when you look at Parkinson is the investment, Karl. It's just not there. Mm-hmm. And it's going to take a multi-year investment of 10 or more times what we're putting in. So if you put 200 million, 250 million, if you add foundations in, even 300 million, it's 2 to 3 billion a year to move HIV that took several years, many years to do that. So, you have to put enough into the funnel into a complex disease like this. And now you're talking about potentially the most complex disease in clinical medicine. So, I think sometimes we identify something that we can do something about, and that's important, and we get on it. And so National Institutes of Health does a great job. Walter Korshets does a great job. And he says, okay, let's share more. Let's put more, things in place to share and everything. They do that. Great. But, love Walter Korshets, love the NIH, they've been instrumental to my own career, but that's not going to move the needle. Okay. It's not even going to tick the needle. Like here's the needle moving. It's not even going to move a tremor. It's not even going to make the needle tremor, even a slight tremor. Okay. It's not going to do that. It will, however, remind us that there are many factors involved in the change. And I think when there's limited resources, people tend to fight amongst themselves. And then you start to see things even on Twitter and Facebook where people start to say, well, that research is dumb, or I don't like that, or whatever. I'm guilty of that too, right? I don't like the fact that you spent money on something I think isn't going to work. It doesn't mean you're not going to learn something from it. And a lot of things don't work and end up being important. So, the best animal model of Parkinson's disease came because a person was mixing a recreational drug, a medicinal chemist, and ended up with MPTP, and that ended up being, transformative for Parkinson research. So you have to be careful about leveling that. But when there's a limited number of resources out there, when you're fighting for the 200 million, now we're starting to fight each other. So you talk about if you change that equation and you say, okay, the number of applications we're going to fund is triple or quadruple, you're going to have more young people coming into the field. You're going to have more specialists. It's going to make a transformational change. And, one thing that we haven't talked about here that's also, important and something I'm passionate about is we just don't have the critical mass of people in the field that we're going to need to take care of the folks who have Parkinson and to make sure they're getting good care. Not the least of which would be, a higher level of multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary care, but how about just care? And so, there are challenges. And as we move along that road, if the pace of the road is really slow toward, moving toward transformative therapies, then we really got to take care of the people that are on that road, because they're going to be on that road, for a long time. And I think there are lots of folks, many of whom are my friends, that don't feel that way, that feel that all the investment should go one place or another. But I think, again, humility, having treated a lot of people for many years, I want the great therapies as much as anybody else does, but I think Eastern medicine has it right when we think of our lives as a limited lifetime. I have a limited lifetime. You have a limited lifetime. So we all just have to decide how we're going to spend the minutes of our day. And if we become too, mono-focused, too myopic for new therapies, then we miss the opportunity to change so many people's lives. And so, I'm a big advocate of balance. And I know that there's a counterpoint to that, put all the money into research and cures and everything and get there faster. And, and there's merit to that argument too. So I don't want to shortchange my colleagues who believe that as well. But my view after doing this for many years is we got to be more Eastern medicine in our approach. It's not going to matter if we catalyze the reaction with what we need, which is, a lot more money, a lot more resources, 10, 15 times what we're putting in now. That's what the other diseases did to move the needle. But decide how fast we're going to walk on that road. And if we're not going to walk like super fast, then we need to invest more money on taking care of the people who are on that road and their families. So
yeah, I feel like we're building the rocket as we're trying to get it up, because we have to care for those people now and provide them whatever we need in order for them to live a quality life. But at the same time, they have to believe that they can live a quality life. And we're doing the other side of the house, which is finding the treatments and finding the therapeutics at the same time. So it's like we have 3 lanes of traffic and we're trying to lay down the tarmac and the pavement while we're going along, and we can't leave those people behind. We have to find better care for the individual, better mental health, better physical health, better assistive devices, even to make the quality of the life last when people want a quality of life.
I think we should look more at quality and not focus on quantity as much as live now and focus on it. Don't live for today. Don't look at tomorrow right now. Do the best you can with what you have, and look. You might look forward, but don't look so far. Don't look so far that you lose sight of today.
And don't stay in the past either. It's the mindfulness principle. You have to make the most of what you have today.
Yeah.
And tomorrow is
I agree.
Beginning.
I agree with all of those points, and I do think it's important, and I think that we have to enjoy our lives, and as Davis Finney has been quoted as saying, make every day your best day. I think that's what he told me when he leaned over to me at the White House, and I remember that moment. I think that's a really important way to live life. And I also believe that you can live a better life with Parkinson's disease, but you've got to approach it maybe a little different.
Exactly.
And I'll also throw a pitch in for the ending of, because I don't think we talk about that as much either, is having options if people feel like that it's the end, and they need to have an option to be able to say I'm finished, and have something that is available to everybody if they feel like that it's done. And
Right.
we don't talk about that often
Yeah.
enough either.
Right.
We would love to have you back. We have so many more questions. So
Yeah, I don't, half the stuff we talked about wasn't
Yeah,
even
on
on
the
the
list.
list.
Yeah.
But it was an
Well,
excellent discussion. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
happy to come back anytime. I'm grateful to both you, Carl, and you, Angela, for all that you do for the Parkinson community. Your voices matter. You have a great podcast. You have a great presence on Twitter and the social media channels, and just keep talking, keep the dialogue going, and try to see if you can harmonize the symphony of voices, and because we need you.
Well, and thank you for what you're doing with your videos and the secrets blog and the books
and the PD Avengers, and
there's so much. And the ending Parkinson's book was, absolutely phenomenal for wonderful voices that hopefully is going to be a part of that, lighting the fire underneath the community and getting us to move. So thank you. And not to mention all the work that you do at University of Florida and the people that you treat there, and the research and heading the department. So thank you.
We know you're a busy gentleman, so it's very nice of you to give us the time you've given us. We appreciate that. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's an honor, and wish y'all luck, and see you on Twitter.
You got it,
if y'all want to have a great conversation, get on the Facebook, Twitter, check out the Parkinson Foundation. And then for the people that have questions, we run a great free helpline with the best nurses in the business, 1-800 the number 4 PD info, 1-800-4PD info, and they're just awesome. So if you have questions or need to know where care is, or they'll help you. So y'all, thanks for what you all are doing.
Well, thank you. It's self appreciation for all of us. So keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care, Michael.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.